Ancient Mysteries. The riddle of the Sphinx, the ancient pyramids of Teotihuacan, the hanging gardens of Babylon, these are just a few of some of the ancient mysteries that continue to fascinate us and inspire wonder and awe. Chapter 1. The Great Sphinx of Giza. Nearby the site of the infamous Great Pyramids lies another monumental occurrence, a marvel known as the Great Sphinx, half man, half animal. Scientists have debated if the giant Sphinx is older than 4,500 years, and some have stated that the large stone sculpture is almost 20,000 years old. If that's the case, then that would make the giant stone sculpture at Giza the oldest monument ever known to man, and also the oldest monument ever recorded on Earth. But overall, Egyptologists and scholars would agree that the pyramid is at least 4,500 years old. Some have said Pharaoh Khafre was the original commissioner of the project, that was originally commissioned as part of the Valley Temple. Some say Khafre commissioned it, and the structure is actually the image of Khafre himself. Recent scientific tests conclude that indeed the figure bears a sharp resemblance to Khafre, but that it can also be the image of Khafre's father, Khufu. A few have said it even resembles Khafre's grandfather, Sneferu. There is no actual inscriptions of any kind on the Sphinx as to have noted who was responsible for its creation, but later on a stone plaque was added to the site. The large plaque, known as a stele, was commissioned by the pharaoh Thutmose of the first dynasty of the New Kingdom, after he and his men dug the Sphinx out of its sandy grave where it had been buried for years under mounds of sand that collected there on the site. On Thutmose's plaque, also known as the Dream Stele, it had an original inscription suggesting Khafre was the original builder. But as of this day, nobody really knows for sure who constructed the giant monument. It is widely believed that the nose of the Sphinx was shot off and defaced by Napoleon Bonaparte, who revered its African features. But Egyptian scholars suggest that the defacement was done even earlier, not by Napoleon, but by a crazed Islamic fanatic who was mad that the people had been worshipping the giant stone construction. Chapter 2. The Lost City of Atlantis. Atlantis is a fictional island mentioned in Plato's major works, Timaeus and Critias, as part of an allegory on the hubris of nations. In Plato's story, Atlantis was described as a major naval empire that ruled all western parts of the known world. After an ill-fated attempt to conquer ancient Athens, Atlantis falls out of favor with the gods and submerges the whole country into the Atlantic Ocean. Since Plato describes Athens as resembling his ideal state in the Republic, the Atlantis story is meant to bear witness to the superiority of his concept of a true state. Despite its minor importance in Plato's work, the Atlantis story has had a considerable impact on mainstream literature in general. The depiction of Atlantis was taken up in the works of several major Renaissance writers. Plato's vague indications of the time of the events, more than 9,000 years before his time, and the alleged location of Atlantis, as described by him beyond the Pillars of Hercules, gave rise to much pseudo-scientific speculation. As a consequence, Atlantis has become a byword for any and all supposed advanced prehistoric lost civilizations, and continues to inspire contemporary fiction from comic books to films. Plato is known to have freely borrowed some of his allegories and metaphors from older traditions. This led many scholars to suggest possible inspiration of Atlantis from Egyptian records of the infamous Terra eruption. Others have rejected this chain of tradition as incorrect and insist that Plato created an entirely fictional account of Atlantis, all while drawing loose inspiration from contemporary events of his time, like the failed Athenian invasion of Sicily in 415 to 413 BC, or the destruction of Hyke in 373 BC. Atlantis, also known as Atlantis or Atlantica, is fabled to be a legendary island in the Atlantic Ocean, lying west of the Strait of Gibraltar. The principal sources for the legend are two of Plato's famous dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. In Critias, Plato describes how Egyptian priests, in conversation with the Athenian lawgiver Solon, described Atlantis as an island larger than Asia Minor and Libya combined, and situated just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, also known as the Strait of Gibraltar. About 9,000 years before the birth of Solon, the priests said Atlantis was a rich land whose powerful princes conquered many of the lands of the Mediterranean until they were finally defeated by the Athenians and their allies. The spirit of the Atlanteans as a whole eventually became wicked and immoral, and their island nation was swallowed up by the sea as a result of earthquakes, where the nation remained under the sea until this day. The legend of Atlantis is probably just that, a mere legend. But medieval European writers who received the tale from Arab geographers believed it to be true, and later writers tried to identify it with an actual country. Attempts were made to identify Atlantis with America, Scandinavia, and even the Canary Islands. The story of Atlantis, if Plato did not invent it, may in fact be a reflection on ancient Egyptian records of a volcanic eruption on the island of Terra about 1500 BCE. This eruption, one of the largest and most catastrophic eruptions of historical times, was said to be accompanied by a series of earthquakes and tsunamis that shattered civilization on the Mediterranean island of Crete, thereby perhaps giving rise to the legend of Atlantis. Three. Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, 2 miles west of Amesbury. It consists of an outer ring of vertical Saracen standing stones, each around 13 feet high, 7 feet wide, and weighing around 25 tons each. The stones are set within earthworks in the middle of the most dense complex of Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments in England, including several hundred Tumuli burial mounds. The construction of Stonehenge is estimated to have taken place over 4,000 years ago, between 3000 BC and 2000 BC. The purpose of Stonehenge remains a subject of much debate amongst the scientific community. Some theories suggest it was used as an observatory for the sun and moon, while others propose it had a more astronomical or religious significance and also served as a rather important burial site. The monument's alignment with the solstices has led to the belief that it was also used for religious and spiritual ceremonies relating to the changing seasons. Nobody knows for sure the exact purposes of Stonehenge, but the precise methods that were used to construct this major monument are still not fully understood till this day, adding more to its mystique and allure. Some have said the site emits supernatural powers, and despite being similar to other true Neolithic Stonehenges and stone circles, Stonehenge is, in many ways, very different. For example, At more than 24 feet tall at its highest point, its extant trilithon lintels, held in place with sophisticated mortise and tenon joints, makes the construction of the Stonehenge site even more intriguing. Four, the Nazca Lines. On a high and dry plateau, some 200 miles southeast of Lima, more than 800 feet long, straight white lines are drawn into the Peruvian desert, almost at random. Joining them are 300 geometric shapes and 70 figures of animals, including a monkey, spider, and hummingbird. The longest of the lines, known as the Nazca Lines, run straight down a solid pathway for several miles, and some resemble perfect replicas of airplane runways. Since these lines were dated and made to be over 1,000 years old, way before the invention of airplanes, why was there a need for runways in the desert? Were some of these landing strips used by spacemen for alien spacecraft, or even something more bizarre? The biggest sketched objects stretch nearly 1,200 feet across and are even more spectacular if you can view them from the air. Scientists are intrigued at the Nazca, and some suspect the Nazca Lines are almost 2,000 years old because of their age, size, and clear visibility from above. The biggest sketched objects stretch nearly 1,200 feet across and are even more spectacular if you can view them from the air. Scientists are intrigued at the Nazca, and some suspect Nazca Lines are almost 2,000 years old because of their age, size, and clear visibility from above. The lines are often associated with alien contact or alien intervention from another world. Who really knows? Or otherwise, how would an ancient culture have been able to make such a gigantic design in the middle of the desert without anyone being able to take to the air? Oddly, who may know who made these giant lines? Or maybe they were made by someone else, someone or something who already mastered the ways of the sky. These ancient rock markings, also known as geoglyphs, are sophisticated designs, usually made by removing the top, dark-colored layers of rocks and exposing the brighter, whiter sand underneath the dark layers. Nazca, first studied in the early 1900s, the lines were initially thought to be aligned with astrological constellations. But a more recent, in-depth look suggests the Nazca Lines point to ceremonial or ritual sites related to water and fertility. And not only visible from the air, the famed site and shapes can also be observed from the nearby hillside. Five, Maheno Daro. Maheno Daro, meaning Mound of the Dead Men in Sindhi Urdu, is an archaeological site in the province of Sindhi, Pakistan. Built around 2500 BCE, it was the largest settlement of the ancient Indus Valley civilization and one of the world's earliest major cities, equated with the great civilizations of ancient Egypt, Sumeria, and Mesopotamia. With an estimated population of around 40,000 people, Maheno Daro prospered for many centuries, but by 1700 BCE it had all been abandoned, along with other large cities of the Indus Valley civilization. The site was not rediscovered until the 1920s. Since then, significant excavation has been conducted at the site, which was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980, the first site in South Asia to have that distinction. Maheno Daro was built as far back as the 26th century BCE. It was one of the largest cities of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, which developed around 3000 BCE from prehistoric Indus culture. At its height, the Indus civilization spanned much of what is now Pakistan and North India, extending westward to the Iranian border, south to Gujarat in India, and northwards to an outpost in Bactria. Maheno Daro was the most advanced city of its time, with remarkably sophisticated civil engineering and urban planning with sewers, public baths, and even plumbing. When the Indus civilization went into sudden decline around 1900 BCE, the historic site at Maheno Daro was eventually abandoned. The ruins of the city remained undocumented for around 3,700 years, until a man named R.D. Banerjee, an officer of the Archaeological Survey of India, visited the site in 1919, identifying what he thought to be a Buddhist stupa known to be there, and finding an ancient flint tool which convinced him of the site's antiquity. This important discovery led to large-scale excavations of Maheno Daro. In the 1930s, major excavations were conducted at the site. Further excavations were carried out in 1945, and the final series of excavations were conducted in 1964 and 1965. After 1965, excavations were banned due to weathering damage that exposed the structure to the elements. In the 1980s, German and Italian survey groups used less invasive archaeological techniques to gather additional information about Maheno Daro. A dry core drilling conducted in 2015 by Pakistan's National Fund for Maheno Daro revealed that the site is actually much larger than the unearthed area. The regularity of streets and buildings of Maheno Daro suggests the influence of sophisticated ancient urban planning in the site's construction. The sheer size of the city and its provision of public buildings and facilities suggests a high level of social organization for the ancient time period. The city is divided into two parts, the citadel and the lower city. The citadel, a mud brick mound around 39 feet high, is known to have supported public baths, a large residential structure designed to house about 5,000 people, and two large assembly halls. The city had a central marketplace with a large central well. Individual households or groups of households obtained their water from the surrounding smaller wells, while wastewater was channeled to covered drains that lined the major streets. Some houses, presumably those of more wealthy inhabitants, included rooms that appear to have been for the purpose of just bathing, and one building even had an underground furnace, possibly used to generate hot water for heated bathing. Now keep in mind, all this was happening over 4,500 years ago, at a time when such things shouldn't have existed. 6. The Pyramids of Teotihuacan. Mesoamerican pyramids form a prominent part of ancient Mesoamerican architecture. Although similar in some ways to Egyptian pyramids, these New World structures have flat tops, many with temples at the top, and stairs ascending to the top. The largest pyramid in the world by volume is the Great Pyramid of Cholula in the east-central Mexican state of Puebla. The builders of certain classic Mesoamerican pyramids have decorated them with stories about the hero twins, the feather serpent Quetzalcoatl, Mesoamerican creation myths, ritualistic sacrifice, and more. These depictions were written in the form of Maya script on the rises of the steps of the pyramids, on the walls, and on the sculptures within. The Aztecs dominated central Mexico in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. Their capital was Tenochtitlan, on the shore of Lake Texcoco, the site of modern-day Mexico City. They were related to the preceding cultures in the basin of Mexico, such as the culture of Teotihuacan, whose building style they adopted and adapted. Also a dominating force in the ancient world and ancient Mexico was the Maya. The Maya also constructed pyramids. These pyramids relied on intricately carved stone in order to create a stair-stepped design. Many of these structures featured a top platform, upon which a smaller temple building was constructed, associated with a particular Mayan deity. Mayan pyramid-like structures were also erected to serve as a place of interment for powerful rulers. Mayan pyramidal structures occur in a great variety of forms and functions, bounded by regional and periodical differences. Going back further into ancient Mexican history, the Olmecs were an ancient group of indigenous peoples that occupied the same territory in Mesoamerica, stretching from Veracruz to Tabasco around 1300 to 400 BCE. The Olmec Great Pyramid of La Venta is argued to be one of the earliest and most complex settlements and ceremonial sites that can be found among Mesoamerican civilizations. The Tarascan state was a pre-Columbian culture located in the modern-day Mexican state of Teotihuacan. The region is currently inhabited by the modern descendants of the Purépecha. Purépecha architecture is noted for a T-shaped step pyramids known as yacatas. The Teotihuacan civilization, which flourished from around 300 BCE to 500 CE, at its greatest extent included most of Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan culture collapsed around 550 CE and was followed by several large city-states, such as Xochicalco and later the ceremonial site of Tula, which was traditionally being claimed to have been built by an ancient group known as the Toltecs. Teotihuacan is an ancient Mesoamerican city located in a sub-valley of the Valley of Mexico, which is located in the state of Mexico, 25 miles northeast of modern-day Mexico City. Teotihuacan is known today as the site of many of the most architecturally significant Mesoamerican pyramids built in the pre-Columbian Americas, namely the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. At its zenith, perhaps in the first half of the first millennium, Teotihuacan was the largest city in the Americas, considered as the first advanced civilization on the North American continent, with a population estimated at over 125,000 people, making it at least the sixth largest city in the world during its time. The city covered 8 square miles, and 80 to 90% of the total population of the valley resided in Teotihuacan. Apart from the pyramids, Teotihuacan is also well known for its complex multi-family residential homes, the famous Avenue of the Dead, and its intricate, well-preserved murals. The city is thought to have been established around 100 BCE and may have lasted until sometime between the 7th and 8th centuries. But its major monuments were sacked and systematically burned by an unknown group around 550 CE. Some scholars would say that its collapse might have been related to the extreme weather events that plagued the city in the years 53 and 536. After the collapse of Teotihuacan, central Mexico was dominated by more regional powers, most notably Xochicalco and Tula. The entire site covers a total area of 32 square miles and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. It is the most visited archaeological site in Mexico, receiving over 4 million tourists every year. 7. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, listed by Hellenic culture. They were described as a remarkable feat of engineering, with an ascending series of tiered gardens containing a wide variety of trees, plants, shrubs, and vines, resembling a large green mountain constructed of mud bricks. It is said to have been built in the ancient city of Babylon, near present-day Hilla Babil province in Iraq. The Hanging Gardens' name is derived from the Greek word kremastos, which means overhanging, which has a broader meaning than the modern English word hanging and refers to trees being planted on a raised structure, such as a terrace. According to one legend, the Hanging Gardens were built alongside a grand palace known as the Marvel of Mankind by the Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled between 605 and 562 BC, for his wife, Queen Amytis. This was attested to by the Babylonian priest Berossus, writing in about 290 BC, a description that was later quoted by Josephus. The construction of the Hanging Gardens has also been attributed to the legendary queen Semiramis, and the wonders have been called the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis as an alternative name. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the only one of the 7 wonders of the world for which the location has not been definitively established. There are no extant Babylonian texts that mention the gardens, and no definitive archaeological evidence has been found in Babylon to prove its existence. 3 theories have been suggested to account for this. First, that they were purely mythological, and that descriptions found in the ancient Greek and Roman writings, including those of Strabeo, Diodorus, Siculus, and Quintus, represented a romantic ideal of an Eastern garden. Second, that they existed in Babylon but were destroyed sometime around the 1st century AD. The third hypothesis states that this ancient legend refers to a well-documented garden that the Assyrian king Sennacherib built in his capital city of Neveh on the river Tigris near the modern city of Mosul. 8. The Voyage Manuscript. The Voyage Manuscript is an illustrated codex, handwritten in an unknown language referred to as Voynich. The vellum on which it is written has been carbon dated to the early 15th century. Stylistic analysis has indicated the manuscript may have been composed in Italy during the Italian Renaissance period. While the origins, authorship, and purpose of the manuscript are still debated, hypotheses range from a script for a natural language or constructed language, an unread code, cipher, or other form of cryptography, or perhaps a hoax, reference work, or a folkloric work of fiction reminiscent of today's science fiction novels or fantasy fiction, but nobody really knows for sure, since the manuscript is currently lacking the translation and context needed to both properly identify its original context. The manuscript consists of around 240 pages, but there is evidence that more pages are missing. The text is written in strange diametrics, or from left to right, and some pages have varying sizes. Most of the pages have mystical and fantastical illustrations and diagrams, some crudely coloured, with sections of the manuscript showing people, fictitious plants, and even astrological symbols. The manuscript was named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer who purchased the book in 1912. Since 1969, it has been held in Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. The Voynich manuscript has been studied by both professional and amateur cryptographers, including American and British codebreakers from both World War I and World War II, all of which were unsuccessful. The Voynich manuscript has never been officially deciphered, and none of the proposed conclusions or hypotheses have ever been verified. The mystery of the book's meaning and origin has invoked speculation and provoked further research and study across the globe. In 2020, Yale University published the manuscript online in its entirety for all to see. Nine, the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta Army is a collection of terracotta-made sculptures depicting the armies of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. It is a form of funerary art buried with the emperor around 210 BCE with the purpose of protecting him in the afterlife. The figures, dating from approximately the late 200s BCE, were discovered in 1974 by local farmers in Lintong County outside Xi'an, Shanxi, China. The figures range in height according to their rank, with the tallest sculptures being the generals. The figures include independently distinct warriors, chariots, and horses. Estimates from the year 2007 were that the 3 pits containing this huge terracotta army hold more than 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, the majority of which still remain in the pits near Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum today. In addition to the soldiers, other non-military figures were found in other pits as well, including sculptures of officials, acrobats, strongmen, and even musicians. Qin Shi Huang was really a great king, and this was demonstrated in his ingenious terracotta army display, if not for the afterlife, but for himself. The construction of the tomb was described by ancient historian Sima Qian, who lived from 145 to 90 BCE, in records of the Grand Historian, the first of China's 24 dynastic histories, written a century after Qi Shi's mausoleum completion. Work in the mausoleum began in 246 BCE, soon after Emperor Qi Shi Huang, then aged 13, succeeded his father as king of Qin, and the project eventually involved up to 700,000 workers. Geographer Li Deohuan, writing 6 centuries after the first emperor's death, recorded in Shu Jing Zhu that the location of Mount Lai was a favored location due to its auspicious geology. It was famed for its jade mines, and its northern side was rich in gold, and its southern side was rich in jade. The first emperor, Qi Shi Huang, knowing about Mount Li's fine reputation, therefore chose to be buried there with his army of over 8,000 men. 10. The Antikythera Mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism is an ancient Greek hand-powered model of the solar system, claimed to be used for navigation purposes, described as the oldest known example of an analog computer. It was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance. It could also be used to track the 4-year cycle of athletic games, which was similar to an Olympiad, the cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. This amazing artifact was among the wreckage retrieved from a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera in 1901. In 1902, it was identified by archaeologist Valerios Steis as containing a mysterious gear. The device, housed in the remains of a wooden framed case, was found as one lump, later separated into 3 main fragments, which are now divided into 82 separate fragments among major conservation efforts. 4 of these fragments contain gears. Gears are attributed to the mechanics of the Industrial Revolution, a time thousands of years into the future, so this finding of the Antikythera mechanism was indeed a marvel, proving sophisticated engineering was being developed even further back in history than imagined. The largest gear is about 5 inches in diameter and originally had 223 teeth. In 2008, a team from Cardiff University used computer X-ray tomography and high-resolution scanning to image the inside fragments of the crust-encased mechanism and read the faintest inscriptions that once covered the outer casing. This suggests it had 37 meshing bronze gears, enabling it to follow the movements of the sun and moon through the zodiac, to predict eclipses, and to model the irregular orbit of the moon, where the moon's velocity is higher in its perigee than its apogee. This motion was studied in the 2nd century BC by astronomer Hipparchus of Rhodes, and it's fabled that he may have been consulted in the machine's construction. There is also speculation that a portion of the mechanism is missing, and it calculated the positions of the 5 planets known at the time. The inscriptions were further deciphered in 2016, revealing numbers connected with the planetary cycles of Venus and Saturn. The instrument is believed to have been designed and constructed by Hellenistic scientists that date back to about 87 BC, between 150 and 100 BC, or 205 BC. In 2022, researchers suggested its initial calibration date, not construction date, could have been in 178 BC. Other experts propose 204 BC as a more likely calibration date. Machines with similar complexity did not appear again until the advanced astronomical clocks of clockmaker Richard of Wallingford in the 14th century. All known fragments of the Antikythera mechanism are kept at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, Greece, along with reconstructions and replicas of the unique mechanism to demonstrate how this marvel of engineering may have looked and worked.